everybody. Welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Kutlick.
And today on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Godzilla versus Kong. I want to say Godzilla versus King Kong every time I say it, but it is not yet appropriate at the beginning of that movie. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the so-called Monsterverse, the three films that precede it, and where maybe we think this is going. The first of these films in the official continuity would be 2014's Godzilla. That was directed by Gareth Edwards, a story by David Callum, screenwriter Max Borenstein. Gareth Edwards, probably at this point, better known for Rogue One. I think that's certainly one of the projects leading to him becoming a bigger name was Godzilla. But he's still kind of in an interesting spot, Edwards. I think he still needs to have a huge movie before he's considered a huge director.
Yeah, Gareth Edwards, I think, needs one more hit under his belt. Rogue One was successful, but it's kind of a, not contentious film, but it's kind of an overlooked film in the Star Wars canon. And it came out kind of a weird time for Star Wars where there was a lot of directorial shifts. After that was Solo with, Ron Howard doing all those reshoots. And there was a lot of production problems on Rogue One, but I think he kind of proved himself, not just off of Godzilla, but also off of Rogue One, that he can create a pretty interesting, somewhat lo-fi, military movie. It's weird to say, Godzilla, that 2014 Godzilla was a military movie, but that's what I took away from it as the main focus of that one.
David Callum, appearing to be the sort of initial writer on that, he had come off of Expendables. He went and did an uncredited rewrite on Ant-Man just after that, and he'll have Mortal Kombat and Shang-Chi coming out this year, actually. You can kind of see where he was coming from with that angle. Most Godzilla movies are pretty much what that Godzilla movie is. It's a lot of, how are we going to deal with Godzilla, and then you don't really get to Godzilla until really the third act, and that's sort of that movie. People don't like that pacing, but that's why a lot of people don't like older Godzilla movies. It's not so much wrong as it is how those stories are told. And I felt like Godzilla also did a good job of kind of establishing the type of monsters we were going to get, that you were going to have a somewhat consistent idea of where they were coming from and how they would interact, I guess.
Yeah, you hear a bit of they don't exactly say Hollow Earth theory in this, but they kind of speculate that they came from somewhere a bit unnatural, but also very ancient. I mean, that gets fleshed out until Hollow Earth later on, and it becomes a big focal point in Godzilla versus Kong.
Max Borenstein also on that. Borenstein, from what I can see, seems to be a sort of the controlling writer across the Monsterverse films. He's involved in all of them at some level. So this was followed in 2017 by Kong Skull Island. That's Jordan Vogt-Roberts directing, John Gatton's with story, Dan Gilroy, Max Borenstein, and Derek Connolly taking up the screenwriting credit on that. I would say Vogt-Roberts not quite even at the level of Edwards at this point, but he is the director attached to what seems to be a very real Metal Gear Solid project right now.
I don't know how they're going to adapt Metal Gear Solid, but good luck to them.
Just take it one plot point at a time.
That first game's going to be 3 movies. But I like Kong probably the most out of all these. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I like that as a bit more of a down-to-earth Vietnam thing. I like that the characters feel a bit more fleshed out, and I feel like Kong gets the best fleshed out of all the monsters in this. We talked about it briefly, but I kind of like that it was a mix of Apocalypse Now and a kaiju movie.
I agree with that. Kong, I think even at this point, and that's something we'll talk about as we get through all of them, is still my favorite. I think it's very balanced. I think it's genuinely one of the best kaiju scripts ever written, if you're looking at that from that perspective. Writer on that, as you were saying, being John Gattons, who has some interesting credits. I would say Probably the most recognizable before he gets on Kong would be Real Steel, which is actually somewhat underrated in itself. I think that's an effective movie. Dan Gilroy also on there. Gilroy has some of those bigger credits to his name. Nightcrawler perhaps being the biggest. Oddly enough, the character in Nightcrawler was apparently based off of Dan Gilroy himself, but not like he was writing it like that's how they portrayed it. Free Jack, also involved with Real Steel, also involved with Born Legacy. He's a pretty well pedigreed writer. And Derek Connolly, best known otherwise for Jurassic World, both of them. Oh, and he also was one of the 447 people who worked on Rise of Skywalker. Who knew? I think Kong does come off the best. It's the most consistent movie. Best of luck to Vogt Roberts on Metal Gear Solid, but I think if we're looking at who is doing the screenplay, Bornstein back on there once again, I think is the control. I think part of your reason that this script was probably a little better and felt a little more natural is Gilroy. He's exhibited that ability frequently, and Derek Connolly seems like he's kind of all over the place too. So it might be a good indicator of really the pedigree that was put into that movie. That's, I guess, somewhat surprising. But they did really want to establish this universe as something that they could bank on going into the future. Third would be Michael Dougherty's Godzilla King of the Monsters. Dougherty, not a huge director, but another one who's been involved with a lot of projects, primarily as a writer, X2, Superman Returns, Krampus, but Trick or Treat being definitely his calling card. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. The ultimate Halloween movie, I think we determined. He's joined on that script by Max Bornstein again, and Zach Shields. Shields himself, a producer on a bunch of Dougherty's projects, also involved with the Haunters documentary about people who work in haunted houses, which was pretty fun. The rest, we already know where they're coming from. Dougherty, very much a Hollywood veteran, if not with the biggest credits. But I think, like I said, Trick or Treat, you can't really go against.
No, I think weirdly that Godzilla King of the Monsters felt the most rushed out of all of them. It's like there's a 3-year gap between the 2014 Godzilla and Kong Skull Island, and then suddenly there's like a 2-year, like a year and a half after Kong, they're doing a Godzilla sequel. It just feels a little weird. I mean, that's just a problem with, I guess, Universal in general. They were kind of trying to make multiple extended universes here, such as the infamous, what is it, the Horrorverse? What were they calling it?
It's the Dark Universe.
The Dark Universe, that's what it was called, as opposed to the Monster Universe, which is completely different. Even though they both have monsters in it, but I guess I'm not a film executive. I have some problems with it, but this is also like a problems I have with all of the Monster Universe, and I guess like films, big budget films in general. So I'm kind of not going to belabor the point of this, but I think it kind of feels a bit rush compared to the other ones.
See, I'm always torn on this movie because I think from a critical lens, yeah, it's not that good, but there's a consistency to it that I appreciate. The action stays up, and I think one of the better things in it is, once again, not unlike the 2014 Godzilla, this kind of also represents in one film a whole era of Godzilla, that sort of like 70s Godzilla, where it's about how many monsters you can pack into a movie. I thought all the design work was really great. I thought it looked really good. And I'm saying this in preparation for Godzilla vs. Kong. I think it's not a great movie, but it does precisely what it's supposed to do, and I can't really get mad at it.
Yeah. I can't get mad at it either. I mean, you do have Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, which is always going to be cool, unless you really, screw it up. I don't know. I just feel like it was hard for me to really, get invested in this film, not just because of the characters, but just, I have a hard time getting invested in like the action and the weight of this film in particular.
I think you have a point as far as the human characters go in this, and there is the ridiculous double cross. But I don't know. While they're in the fights and while the monsters are flying around, I don't really have much of a problem with it. It's not. I don't think it's too long, which is, like I said, we're all kind of building up to how we're going to talk about Godzilla versus Kong. But yeah, I think it was a nice introduction, and once again, even after Kong, we're getting hammered with these Easter eggs implying that Kong and Godzilla are going to come into conflict. 2 years later, though it was not supposed to be 2 years later, we get Godzilla vs. Kong, releasing on HBO Max in the US and in theaters across the world. Adam Wingard is our director for this film. Prior to this, You're Next and The Guest, to a certain extent, I think are the biggest things he did. He did do the Blair Witch sequel in 2016. I feel like I should hold off on that if we ever do a Blair Witch episode, which we could. And the Death Note movie for Netflix, which was not incredibly well received. As someone who did not have any involvement with Death Note beforehand, I didn't hate it, but I didn't think it was all that interesting. Here he's getting Godzilla and Kong. Script is Doherty and Zach Shields. With Terry Rossio. To me, that implies they were probably developing it and Doherty didn't get to direct it for whatever reason or didn't want to direct it for whatever reason. Terry Rossio, pretty prolific, known for Aladdin, the Disney 90s cartoon, not the live-action remake, Shrek, Pirates of the Caribbean. That's something I didn't know until we were researching this, and I think it's going to impact my view of it. Screenplay from Eric Pearson, who had also worked on Thor Ragnarok, a couple other projects for Disney in there. And once again, Max Borenstein as that seeming control over the universe. Up front, I did not think this was very good.
So, this was the first film I saw in theaters after the whole COVID pandemic. My dad and I recently got both vaccine shots. And we just kind of saw it on a whim on like a Tuesday afternoon. And we both felt like it was kind of a movie you had to see in theaters just to get the nice sounds of all the big dinos and gorillas fighting each other. And it was cool to see in theaters. I like some of these action scenes, but it does feel very much like fitting in like two different movies at the same time. And one movie just feels completely superfluous to the other.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. We did not discuss this before the podcast, by the way, at all. So, 113 minutes, not terribly long. Let's say probably only 100 of that are on screen. Pretty long credits on these ones. I agree. I think the fights between Godzilla and King Kong were fine. I think the entire plot where they brought back, I think the plot bringing back Millie Bobby Brown was completely and utterly unnecessary, which is bizarre to say for a movie that short. The fighting was fine. I think they over-explained everything. There was this bizarre need in the script to connect everything from before it, and it's that, we've talked about the great things about the MCU. One of the bad things about the MCU is this influence it's had on everyone else where it makes them think they have to write like that all the time. And they even brought on guys who had worked on Marvel projects here. I think you could have done that movie with half the explanation. I think the whole bizarre subplot where King Kong has to go get an axe, but like it's not even a subplot because no one knows what's going on. Like it's just they put so many things in this movie they didn't need when they could have taken some of that time to focus on a couple of characters and make them feel a little more real. I think the best candidate for that is the little girl whom Kong has, taken a liking to, and they communicate. There's so little reason for so much that's in this. I would say even extending to Mechagodzilla, I think was, yes, you need to have something for both of them to fight. But the way they got to it was just, it felt like two different movies, one of which didn't need to happen.
Well, yeah, I think we both agree that the Godzilla quote-unquote subplot was easily the weakest. I mean, the characters are just there just to see Mechagodzilla. That's really what that plot is, all that's doing. Just to set up Mechagodzilla. And even then, you don't need all this like conspiracy stuff or anything else like that. I do like the Hollow Earth stuff because I can see a lot of stuff kind of being spun out of that. I think the Hollow Earth concept is kind of a cool idea. I like how they kind of like showed it too, where it's kind of like two Earths on top of each other and gravity gets all weird and there's all these giant dinosaurs and stuff. I thought that was really cool, but I do agree that it's like some parts they keep explaining, like they kept going over and over again on how the gravity is weird there. But when Kong gets to that throne room, suddenly they're talking about like, they're implying there was like a Kong empire and they made like dinosaur bones and axes out of like Godzilla scales. Like so much just starts happening. And then Godzilla drills like a hole all the way to the center of the earth, which is wild. Like after all of that, and Godzilla just climbs out really easily. But after a certain point, you just gotta be like, you just want to see the monkey and the lizard fight. And I think that's where the film got to at that point. It's like, we set up enough. Let's just have the fighting happen.
Yeah, I just think it's a really poorly, like, all of these scripts are kind of written by committee. Like, there's no getting away from that. You're going to have, we just listed I think 5 writers on this. And sitting here, we know that there are more people involved with the writing of this film. I think this was too many ideas from too many different people. And this is where I will criticize Wingard pretty heavily. I think it's his job to cut the fat, and he didn't. There's just so many characters running around. Like the guy who's supposed to be piloting Mechagodzilla, and he's in Ghidorah's brain to do so, but then it gets severed, and like all of that is just useless. Like,
yeah,
and there's a lot of like. You're always taking all of this type of stuff with a grain of salt, like logic-wise. But there were some things in this movie that were like killing me. Like, so Godzilla's able to blow a hole into the center of the earth, right?
Yeah, he just drills it, even though it's like thousands of miles deep and gravity is really weird there.
So then why, when Godzilla uses his atomic breath, can Kong block it with a piece of metal?
Well, no, it's a scale. It's like one of the Godzilla scales, I think.
No, I think there's a shot where he goes for it and he grabs something. Someone fact check us that. I'm almost positive there's a shot where there's like a laser coming out and he blocks it. We'll see. I think I'm right.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to go back and watch.
Everyone, like, comment below how wrong I am or how correct I am.
I thought it was a Godzilla scale. It might be, or they weren't. Because
I'm talking about the scale. It's definitely a scale. Okay. But there's a shot where Kong blocks a blast with like a piece of debris he picks up.
Yeah, it's like a ship part or something. I think that was in the city fight. Yeah, that part you're right.
Yeah, city fight. The bright and shiny city fight, because people don't like night fights anymore.
Well, but that's the thing that kind of drives me crazy about these movies too. Is like, there's night fights, but then everything's just blue. So it's just like dull fucking colors. It drives me wild. The Harry Potter films do this too, and that's really the trend start. But like, color palette aside, which always drives me crazy, where it's like either orange or blue. I quite like the ship fight too. There's a couple like Neon Genesis references there. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Might have been. I know Kong Skull Island was slightly influenced by Evangelion. I don't know if this one directly was. It might have been. But I think you're right. There's some points where like the logic kind of gets really weird, especially towards the end of that city fight where like Mechagodzilla is just able to just beat crap out of regular Godzilla.
Right. And I guess and it's sort of like, well, if it is Ghidorah's brain, okay. But they kind of imply it's, I don't know. There's just sort of all these dangling things that like don't even need to be there. And I thought for something that had this big fight with these big stakes, I also felt like the post-fight where it's just King Kong back on Skull Island was sort of like, that was it? Like, that was...
Yeah, it just finishes.
What did we establish here?
But I think my theorizing is that it's going to be like he's not King Kong yet. He's just Kong. So I think the later films is going to be him becoming King Kong and becoming king of the Hollow Earth or whatever, and reclaiming the Monkey Empire or whatever was down there. And Godzilla gets to roam the outer Earth, doing things like killing, I don't know, like Ghidorah 2 or something. I don't know what else he can fight now. Maybe they get Ultraman. I have no idea.
I thought the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters was hinting towards Mecha Ghidorah, but I guess you had to establish Mecha Godzilla first. I don't know. Big criticism there. And I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this. I really don't like that Mecha Godzilla design much.
Yeah, I can see that. I like the chunkier version too. This one's a very like skeletal. I like the grabby arms on it, but I don't like much else on it. Like the little like claw arms it has, and I like that it has like rocket powered arms. But I can see what you mean because it feels very like thin and not like chunky and thick like the original design is.
Yeah, it was one of the thoughts I had is I felt like when it was designed, there might have been a stage in this script where Godzilla was being impersonated and they had made like a fake Godzilla and what you were going to see was a stripped away like fake Godzilla. Because that would almost be as good of an explanation of Godzilla knowing Mechagodzilla was that there and getting mad type thing. Would just be having like a fake setup where it looks like Godzilla's the bad guy. I don't know. I didn't think that much was serving the plot. I think once again, Kong is your more interesting character. Godzilla's just kind of there and still has to win. I don't know, but it seems like it did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably going to happen with every like Godzilla is that Godzilla always is just kind of there. I think the better Godzilla films kind of like emphasize that. I mentioned before that I really like Shin Godzilla. In Shin Godzilla, Godzilla literally is just there. And everything else is just superfluous to it. Where like he's just taking a walk, and because he's taking a walk, that destroys half of Tokyo.
Yeah. Well,
So,
we are getting more of those as well. Shin Ultraman this summer.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
And I don't know if you heard, they just announced Shin Kamen Rider.
I did, which is going to be really cool. I don't know if we'll ever do a Kamen Rider episode. We'll probably do a Power Rangers episode at some point, but I really like Kamen Rider.
I can only speak confidently about Masked Rider, so I might not be too good.
And I think that's kind of a problem all these Godzilla films run into, is that it's kind of hard to characterize as anything, which is what these films kind of try to do, that he likes humans for whatever reason. I feel like they do a much better job with Kong, having him like kind of have some kind of vague wants and needs and being able to relate to that child in the film. And I think that was a really good plot point, is like how much they had Kong communicate with the other characters, because that's something you usually don't see out of a Kong film, is how much he like communicates with other characters. Even in that grandiose Peter Jackson version, he's just kind of an animal, but here they kind of treated him as like kind of a very intellectual being.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with like the histories of the two characters. You know, Godzilla on one hand, you know, starts off as a pretty straight monster movie and then sort of creates the kaiju genre and becomes about, you know, as I was saying, like how many monsters you can fit in a movie and what those monsters' interactions are. Kong, in his more successful iterations, has not really been that. You know, you have really early on the original King Kong versus Godzilla. You have King Kong Escapes, which is the Toho sequel to that. But he's only sort of in that kaiju genre because, you know, he's like the Shadow to Batman. Like, it's a character that exists beforehand and really like lays the groundwork for that type of stuff, but isn't quite that genre, and then was brought back into it. Even Kong Skull Island is a fairly controlled movie in that respect. There are the other monsters, but the other monsters, like they are in the original King Kong, are just that. Like, there's not an intelligence behind them. arguably there's not much of an intelligence behind Kong in the original one either. It's sort of this idea that we extrapolated from it, like that romanticizing it. And that's really what the comment in Peter Jackson's is he's taking not so much what King Kong was, but how like the public perceived it. So Kong is fairly distanced from this. I think this is, with its success, is probably going to be the first time where we get like a real run of Kaiju Kong stuff.
Yeah, which I'm excited for. I do want to see more Kong. I hope they don't get to the point where he speaks, like physically says words. I like the sign language concept a lot, actually, from him. We'll see if he stays in Hollow Earth at all, which I don't think will happen, but I do think you can do a lot of films down there. I think there is stuff to mine, literally and like metaphorically, because they are going to mine that like ore, I guess. That was another weird plot point, that ore they suddenly got.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, that's one to me is like one of the biggest problems of this movie is there is so much that they're just dropping in or feeling that they have to refer back to from the other films. Does it damage anything? Not really. I think going forward, you have the opportunity to still make some really great ones. But that was my problem here. Is I think if King of the Monsters was a little sloppy and a little boring, this is double that most of the time.
I think an easy way to fix this is probably focus a bit more on the two villains of this, not just the businessman and that pilot. I think there is an interesting like plot point where that pilot is like hijacking Ghidorah's like one of their three brains. I think that's something like that could have been really like brought out in this film. It could have really helped, flesh it out, because I think the reason they kept that, Godzilla subplot was like they had to, like, or else the movie would be too short. But I think if they focus a bit more on the villains, you would have had that same fact there, but it would be a lot more meat. Like you would have actually had something to kind of set up for future films while also kind of exploring something interesting. Because whenever they cut back to like Millie Bobby Brown, I just immediately started to zone out. I was like, this is so boring. They're not really doing anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was sort of it either needed to be longer or have less things in it, and it really didn't need to be longer. And unless there was going to be something else in there that we, isn't in that version of the plot. But, as you're saying, like, no stinger or anything at the end of this one. I have a feeling that this was going to be a bit of a litmus test. It seems like they're going to go forward. Maybe they'll get Gamera too. We could get all sorts of characters in there.
Maybe they'll cross over Pacific Rim or something. Who knows at this point?
Yeah, they've talked about that a little bit. To do it, to do it in continuity for just not so much for the Monsterverse, but Pacific Rim is a very specific story to it. So I think that would be the biggest roadblock. But who knows? We're just opening portals to the multiverse everywhere now, so no plot doesn't matter. It never did. We all knew that. But you have any other last thoughts on this? I think I got through pretty much everything I had. It's only an hour and 40 minutes,
Yeah. I mean, this is a quick watch. Not a quick watch, but it's a breezy watch. Like, there's not too much going on. It's a fun watch, and I think it was successful in that. The Monsterverse is kind of hard in general to talk about because it kind of feels like every other film is completely different from like the entire franchise, and it doesn't feel like they even know what the franchise is at this point. And hopefully this will help them get their bearings going into the future.
I agree. Well, if you're looking for some statues, toys, or anything, check out ToyStoreGuide.com. They'll hook you up with some great local businesses. Be sure to be patronizing all your local businesses these days and into the future. Let's just keep doing that. I was about to say, I don't think we'll do another episode on it. ENIAC 2, also really great.
Also, Tanker came out this week as well. Well, probably not this week when this episode comes out, but when we recorded it, Tanker and ENIAC 2 came out.
Also, Chip Zdarsky's The Silver Coin. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I got my variants of that one.
Ooh, fancy. Did you get all your Planeswalker variants of the Magic the Gathering comics?
No, I got
that $40 pack.
The one I wanted. But I didn't get all of them. I'm not going to be crazy enough to collect like the 50 covers of Magic the Gathering or something they have.
Good for them. It looks like they were selling them. But I think that's pretty much it for this one. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutler.
And thanks for listening.